Welcome. Thank you for joining us for First Person Conversations with Holocaust Survivors. I'm Bill Benson, and I have hosted First Person for 25 years. Each month, we bring you firsthand accounts of survival during the Holocaust. Each of our First Person guests serves as a volunteer at the museum. We are honored to have Holocaust survivor Robert Teitel share his firsthand account of survival with us. Robert, thank you for joining us and for agreeing to be our first person.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm very glad to be here and be able to tell my story.
Robert, you have a great deal to share, so we're going to get started. Robert, you were born on August 11th, 1941 in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, more than a year after Nazi Germany's occupation of the country. Please tell us what you can about your parents, Abraham Manu and Claire, and their lives before World War II and the Holocaust began.
I can tell you what I know now about my father and my mother. Let me start with my father. My father and his family, parents, older sister, and an older brother, migrated from the Austro-Hungarian part that is now Poland to the Netherlands in 1916. That is, they traveled from southern Poland to the Netherlands between 1914 and 1916 in the middle of World War I. My father was 3 years old when they arrived in the Netherlands. He grew up there, went to school there, eventually went to the Technical University at Delft, commonly known as TU Delft, and earning a degree in aeronautical engineering.
And Robert, he also received some renown as a master chess player, didn't he?
Yes, we have many newspaper articles about his chess playing and standing in tournaments, starting when he was about 15 years old. Over his career, he tied or actually beat several grandmasters, even against two world champion grandmasters in various tournaments. We have a picture and newspaper articles about his actually winning a game against Alexander Alekhine, one of the greatest chess players of all time, who played a chess exhibition in Delft. This picture is of a little book published in 1947 as a memorial to Dutch chess players who were killed in the war. Party, as part of the title, doesn't mean party as in English, but means match or challenge. And verloren means lost. So it really means something like match lost. And to honor my father as a major chess player during the 1930s, the editors of this book completely explicated or explained two of his famous games during the 1930s. As you can see highlighted, he played black in both games, and he won both games. And we have a copy of this book.
And I know we don't have time for it, but that was apparently quite a bit of a saga in its own right for you to obtain a copy of that book.
Oh, yes, as you can imagine, a very small volume printed, and obtaining it. It's a long story, too long for now.
Yeah. Robert, tell us about your mother.
My mother was born in Dusseldorf, Germany. We know very little about her parents, and we don't know when she came to the Netherlands. In 1933, she was a student at the Royal Academy for the Arts in The Hague, studying photography and graphic arts. She then became an assistant to one Piet Zwart, an internationally recognized photographer and graphic artist during the period between the two wars. There are many internet resources about him. And as well as two biographies, and my mother is listed in as a footnote in both biographies. After her year-long assistantship with Piet Zwart, she opened her own studio specializing in photographs of children. This is a picture, obviously, of a child that she took that was published in a Dutch photography magazine. You can notice that she's cited on the photograph as Donsbach in Den Haag. She also, in 1938, curated an exhibit of photographs at which Piet Zwart, this famous photographer, came and talked about the pictures. So she's had several contacts with Piet Zwart.
So clearly, both your parents were very accomplished individuals. What can you tell us about their marriage?
They got married in 1938, and one of their witnesses was indeed, again, Piet Zwart. So she must have had a pretty close relationship with him. We have just learned, literally in the past 2 weeks, that the other witness at their wedding turned out to be a then well-known resistance fighter. We had not been able to read his signature on the wedding certificate, but someone we've corresponded with in the Netherlands was able to do so. Unfortunately, this resistance fighter did not survive the war. After their marriage, they moved to Amsterdam for my father's job as an aeronautical engineer. I guess he was one of the people who was actually able to use his degree directly.
Robert, you mentioned that you just within the last 2 weeks learned about the other witness. We'll come back to this later in the conversation today, but the fact that you're still learning stuff today is just remarkable, and we'll come back to that. Robert, tell us about your paternal grandfather, Marcus.
My paternal grandfather, as I mentioned earlier, led his family from what is now Poland to the Netherlands in the middle of World War I, with 3 little children aged 1, 3, and 5 when they left. He then ran a printing and publishing company in the Netherlands. He also became much involved with the effort to create Hebrew as a modern spoken language. We have newspaper articles of many meetings of a Hebrew-speaking group at his home in Den Haag, or The Hague, during the 1920s and 1930s. He left the Netherlands shortly after my parents' wedding to go to Jerusalem. My father's older sister had moved to Jerusalem a couple of years earlier.
Robert, in the mid-1930s, your father went to Nazi Germany to protest the arrest of German workers, and that resulted in his being questioned by the Gestapo. Can you tell us more about this and what happened in Germany?
Well, in 1935, my father came to the attention of the Gestapo when he went from the Netherlands to a town, Wuppertal, Germany, to help workers who were being arrested and put on trial for opposing Nazi policies. He was questioned by the Gestapo, released, but a surveillance file was opened about him, and several other members of what became known as the Wuppertal Committee. We have a copy of that surveillance file.
What more can you tell us about the Wuppertal Committee, and why do you think your father got involved to the degree that he actually went to another country to engage in protests?
I don't know exactly why he became involved in the committee, but he clearly had very strong anti-Nazi views.
World War II began in September 1939 with Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland. In May 1940, the Nazis occupied the Netherlands and gradually imposed restrictions on Dutch Jews. Can you tell us more about these restrictions and what kind of restrictions they imposed and what these meant for your family?
After the after the Germans, the Nazis occupied the Netherlands, let's get them in the right order, they gradually imposed the kind of restrictions that they had imposed and will impose on other countries that they conquered, such as at first dismissing Jews from the civil service, and then preventing judges, lawyers, professors from doing their jobs, forcing Jews to register themselves as Jews with local governments, and of course, making them wear the Jewish star. I don't know exactly of any immediate effects on my parents, other than probably they're having to register as Jews and having to wear the yellow star. The word Yod in the middle here is the Dutch word for Jew.
And Robert, this yellow Star of David is large, and it's made of cloth, and so Jews were forced to have those sewn onto their garments, so they were very visible, so everybody knew what it represented.
Right. The dashed lines around the edges were clearly the stitching marks.
Yeah. Shortly before you were born, your parents moved out of Amsterdam. What do you know about that?
Yeah, my parents moved to what became known as a safe house in a small town of Muiderberg, which is effectively a suburb of Amsterdam, in 1941, with another family named Val. Mr. Val was also an engineer from Amsterdam. As the Vals and my parents moved at the same time to the same safe house, suggests that they probably knew each other in Amsterdam to start with. As we've learned, another resistance fighter also lived in that same safe house.
Your mother returned to the safe house soon after you were born in August 1941. The deportation of Jews from the Netherlands began the following year in the summer of 1942. Please tell us what these deportations meant for your family.
Yes, we returned to that safe, we meaning my mother and I, right after birth, and my Amsterdam residence registration card says at birth, moving to this house in Muiderberg. My father was arrested in June of 1942, just before the mass arrests of Jews in the Netherlands. He was at that time working for a Dutch airplane company, and he was sent to Amersfoort, a rather brutal prison in the Netherlands. This was in June. In October of that year, he was sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp and was summarily executed the day after he arrived.
Your mother somehow knew about the impending arrest, but she was not able to warn him in time. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the precise circumstances we don't know, but my mother seems to have had some strong connections to the resistance. Remember, I mentioned that a well-known, eventually well-known resistance fighter was a witness at their marriage, and that a subsequently known resistance fighter lived in the same house in Muiderberg. We don't know whether she was actually active herself in the resistance.
Even though your father was sent to Mauthausen and executed the very next day after you arrived, your mother and family friends did not know about his death, and they attempted to get him released. Tell us what she and the friends attempted to do to get him released.
At first, of course, when he disappeared, she simply tried to find out what had happened to him. And in the process, she met with various Nazi officials. Once she learned that he was in Amersfoort, she tried to get him released, once again meeting with various Nazi officials. After being unsuccessful in getting my father released, my mother and a group of friends, mostly former classmates at TU Delft, and a lawyer friend, tried to create a dossier to give to the Nazis, claiming that my father was not Jewish. They were basing their claim on the fiction that my father was the maid of the family while they lived in Vienna on their way from Poland to the Netherlands. Although my father had already been executed, some Nazi official told the friends that my father was still alive.
So they had every reason to hope that this attempt might be successful, or at least worth the try, because they didn't know he was dead. Yeah, Robert,
Yeah.
what do you know about how your mother tried to protect the two of you following your father's arrest and deportation?
Well, after my father's arrest, she was clearly worried about where she was living with me. So she moved back to Amsterdam with me. And according to some letters we have located, my mother and I constantly moved around in Amsterdam, trying to avoid the Nazis finding us. Sometimes I lived by myself not by myself, but alone with foster families. Sometimes I lived with my mother. When I lived with foster families, they had other kids, so I kind of blended in and was hidden in plain sight. Sometimes, as I said, it was with my mother for brief periods of time, and we kept moving around Amsterdam.
You actually know the names, I believe, of three of the foster families you were with during the war. What can you tell us about them?
Yeah, we know the names of three families. We think there were more, and we're obviously still in the process of trying to find out who these other families may have been. But the first was the Val family that I mentioned earlier, who moved to Middelburg together with my family. I lived with them briefly. Then there was a Mrs. Susanna Wolf, that we have some indication that I lived with her. And I also lived with a Koster family, where Mr. Koster was a classmate of my father's at TU Delft.
Robert, I know we'll talk a little bit more later about the Coster family. With the others, like Mrs. Wolf, for example, have you been able to learn anything about her?
At the moment, we do not have anything more about her other than her name.
As I and I think, like every person who's watching today, um, trying to imagine the stress on your mother as she's trying to find places to uh, place you for hiding, and then worry about where she's going to be. It must have been an unbelievably stressful period for her. Can only imagine.
Yeah.
Robert, you remained in hiding, being moved between different families for your safety until the Allied forces liberated the Netherlands in May 1945. You were briefly reunited with your mother. Please tell us what you know about your time with your mother, and then what happened next for you.
Yeah. After the war ended in 45, May of 45, I believe, sometime shortly thereafter, I was reunited with my mother and lived with her through 1946, so probably less than a year. I started school, but unfortunately, my memories of that time are, in effect, non-existent. So I can't say very much more about what life was like for me at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your mother, of course, still believing that your father was alive, she made efforts to try to locate him. What have you learned about her efforts to try to locate your father?
Well, one of the specific things we know, because we have a copy, is that she placed advertisements in newspapers searching for my father. Placing newspaper articles or advertisements searching for people was very common after the war for searching for people who had been deported to concentration camps, and their family members were trying to locate them.
In fact, for younger viewers today that are watching and so used to internet and things happening much more instantaneously, the use of newspapers to try to locate missing relatives, it was just a very powerful way to try to get it done, and about one of the few, right?
Yeah, yeah. Where no internet, no cell phones, barely telephones.
Your mother wrote letters to one of her best friends about you and about her search for your father. Many years later, you've been able to obtain those letters. How important have these letters been to your understanding of what happened during that time?
Yes, the letters are pretty much the only way I've learned about my existence and the time with my mother, because as I've said, I don't have any memories. At 4 or 4.5 years old, I should, but I don't. So I've learned about my family much from these letters. In particular, that during the war, as might be expected, I was a pretty sickly child. And I know that I had pneumonia at age 2. And I've also learned that I was fed pure butter as a way of gaining calories. This letter is the last of 4 pages. Says that I'm doing much better now, having lived with my mother for maybe 6 months. At the end of the major part of the letter, my mother signs herself as Claire. And then you see the squiggles. Well, the squiggles were my contribution to the letter. And in between, it says that her best friend, to whom this letter is directed, is my favorite aunt. And then she forges my signature, Robertje, which is the Dutch diminutive of Robert.
It's really easy to imagine, to picture your mother with you writing this letter with you, in her lap or next to you, and having you make those little squiggles in there. That's a very powerful thing to see. Robert, your mother became ill with tuberculosis and passed away in 1946. At some point while she was ill, you were sent to live with the Coster family. What do you know about your life with the Costers?
Well, first, as I think I mentioned earlier, that I know I lived with the Costers briefly during the war itself, as one of the places that I lived for a short period of time. After my mother became ill or got diagnosed with tuberculosis, I started and was admitted to a tuberculosis sanatorium. I started living with the Costers full time. I remember being that were pretty much the beginning of any kind of memories I have of my childhood. I remember being a somewhat happy child, being part of a family with their other children, and being in one place for at least to a young child, a period of time.
And I think you even mentioned to me you have a vague memory of going ice skating on a nearby canal while at the Costers, and fleeting memories like that. So you do think those are probably your earliest memories that you have come from that time with the Coster family?
Yeah. We lived in what was then a very rural part of Amsterdam. It is now, as one could expect, a fairly built up area. We actually have a picture of the street on which I lived showing sheep grazing in a meadow. That's how rural it was back in the 40s. I remember running through local fields, visiting a farm, and being able to bicycle to a nearby dike and canal. And as you said, being able to skate on the canal, that's one of my fondest, best, earliest memories.
You lived with the Costers in the Netherlands for about 2 years, while your closest relatives, your paternal grandparents, were in British-controlled Palestine, and you'd mentioned they'd moved there years earlier. Please tell us about what happened when your paternal grandfather came to visit you in 1947.
Right. My grandfather came from Jerusalem, in theory, just to visit me while I was living with the Costers. He intended to take me to Jerusalem. The Dutch government considered that a kidnapping. Perhaps the government had given the Costers, assigned to the Costers, my legal guardianship. I don't know. We got as far as Switzerland. The so-called kidnapping made Dutch and even international news. This is one of maybe a dozen articles we have about the so-called kidnapping. The headline says, "Grandfather kidnaps his grandchild to go to Palestine." And that's the adorable little 6-year-old that I was at the time. As I said, I made international news. It was even covered in a New York City newspaper in 1947. We managed to obtain a copy of that article.
And as you know, that there was in many different newspapers in the Netherlands and probably other places as well. Once you got to Switzerland and you were apprehended in Switzerland because the Dutch government, as you noted, considered that a kidnapping. So when you were apprehended, what happened to your grandfather and then to you?
Well, my grandfather, since he was a legal citizen, having gone to Jerusalem in 1938, was allowed to go back to Jerusalem, whereas Mrs. Koster came to fetch me from Switzerland and bring me back to the Netherlands.
Do you have any idea if there might have been any interest in trying to prosecute him, or it's just they got you back and saw your grandfather off?
Yeah, I think I remember hearing that the Dutch government actually wanted my grandfather to charge him with kidnapping, but the Swiss decided that he ought to be able to go back to Palestine or Jerusalem.
Robert, do you yourself have any specific memories from that incident, which had to be quite dramatic in every way?
Yes, because obviously I had not known my grandfather, and here was a strange man suddenly taking me on a trip. And so I really have maybe suppressed, maybe don't remember most of the trip itself. The one thing I did remember, or do remember, and was able to verify later, is standing in front of a large picture window overlooking a harbor. And that turned out to be the office of a diamond merchant friend of my grandfather's, in Antwerp, Belgium, on our way to Switzerland.
And I think, Robert, I believe you said that your grandfather did move to Jerusalem in 1938. So you had never seen him before. This was your first time even seeing him.
That's correct. That's why I said the trauma must have been my being taken away from the house I had lived in now and family I'd lived in for a year plus to suddenly be taken by this strange man on a trip.
Right. About a year after you returned to the Netherlands with Mrs. Koster, you were placed in an orphanage, and you would spend the next 4 years living in orphanages. What can you tell us about what that time was like for you?
Again, I don't have a lot of memories of those 4 years. They were clearly not the best of years for me. I do remember, however, two specific things, mainly because they lasted pretty much all 4 years. As a Jewish child in an orphanage run by the Dutch Reformed Church, I didn't have to go to church or religious classes each Sunday. That obviously did not sit well with the other kids. The other thing I remember is reading a newspaper pretty much cover to cover every day as a way of escaping the circumstances in which I lived.
Robert, do you have any idea, any insight as to why you didn't continue to live with the Costers? After all, you had been with them. Mrs. Koster returned you from Switzerland, but then you would end up living in orphanages. Do you know anything about that?
Unfortunately, I don't.
No. Who knows? With all the research you do, that may be something that you get some insight to down the road a little bit.
Oh yes, there are. Sorry, there are so many loose threads in my life's history that we'd love to have answers to.
Mm-hmm. If I will hear more, but I trust if anybody will find those answers, you're probably, you and Miriam are going to find them in a way that almost nobody else could do. It's remarkable what you're going to share with us later. Robert, you came to the United States in 1951 as a 10-year-old. Tell us how it's possible for you to immigrate to the United States.
My aunt, my father's sister, as I've mentioned, had moved to Jerusalem a couple of years before my grandparents. She moved, and her family moved to the U.S. right after the war. My grandparents again followed her a couple of years later. Once in the United States, he tried to find a way to allow me to come to the United States, because at this point, the only really living relatives were my grandparents and my aunt, and I was in an orphanage in the Netherlands. So he eventually found a receptive congressman, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr., obviously a man with a good name, who then introduced a bill in the United States Congress in 1950 for the admission into the United States of Robert Frederick Teitel, a minor. This was in February, I think, of 1950. The process took about 18 months to complete paperwork, I guess, to finally allow me to come here in October of 1951, when I was 10 years old.
This legislation that was introduced, as you noted, was February 20th, 1950, and 18 months later, it cleared the way for you to be here. It literally took, as the saying goes, an act of Congress to get you to come to the U.S. Well, what do you recall what it was like for you to leave the orphanage, to be told you're going to move somewhere else, someplace called the United States? What do you remember of that?
I don't remember the actual leaving of the orphanage. Again, I was probably apprehensive, given the prior leaving the Koster family situation. But what I do remember, I guess it would be for every 10-year-old, is flying on a large 4-propeller airplane, having to make 2 refueling stops so I can claim to have been in Scotland and claimed to have been in Gander, Newfoundland, on my way to Idlewild, now Kennedy Airport in New York City. And being a 10-year-old flying alone on such an airplane, I got lots of attention from the flight attendants. This is a copy of my Dutch passport.
I can only imagine the attention that you were getting on that trip. Can you say more about this? This is your Dutch passport that you were able to bring with you to the United States to get you here.
Yes, and a little footnote is when I went recently to get my global entry certificate, which people may know as a way of being allowed to come back in the United States, somewhat bypassing the customs because you're a trusted traveler, as they call it. To get that global entry, I took not only my regular American passport, but since it said that I was born in Amsterdam for safety, I took also this Dutch passport to say, here, I really came to the U.S. legally in 1951. And the agent was so enthused about the passport, she had to show it to all the other agents in the office.
Good thing you hung on to that, it sounds like. Robert, you had finally been able to reunite with your family after having been through numerous separations and trauma. What can you tell us about your adjustment to your new life here in the United States?
Well, as you can imagine, it was interesting becoming an American teenager, then living with grandparents who were born in roughly 1890 in Eastern Europe and lived most of their life in Poland, the Netherlands, and in Jerusalem. So we had the usual clashes about girlfriends, about staying out late, that kind of thing. The one thing I do clearly remember is that I agreed with their very strong respect for education. And so I went to New York City public schools, that is, those that did not have any kind of uniform requirement, wearing a jacket and tie every day through high school.
I'm guessing you were probably one of very few kids who were in high school wearing a coat and tie.
Yes, I frankly don't remember any other kids. And I do remember occasionally having my tie pulled.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about learning English.
Since I came here as a 10-year-old, of course, I was fluent in Dutch. But my orphanage habit of reading a newspaper cover to cover came in very handy. My grandfather, since we were living in New York City, shoved the New York Times under my nose every day. And that with an English-Dutch dictionary is really how I learned English. And to make sure that I was actually reading the articles, he quizzed me every day about that day's news. Sorry, I was going to say, in addition, being 10 years old, it was possible for me to switch languages. So I now speak English, as people tell me, virtually without accent. But in the meantime, forgetting my original native Dutch language. On the other hand, I ate with my grandparents until I was 17. And so I was used to eating basically European style with the fork always in the left hand and not transferring the fork from the left hand to the right hand as is typical in an American style of eating. Since I did that through 17, I still continue eating that way.
Mm-hmm.
Had I made the language switch at 17, it's probable, one, that I would have somewhat of an accent, and two, that I probably would have remembered my Dutch.
Robert, tell us when you became a U.S. citizen. It was pretty darn quickly as you graduated from high school.
Yes. I had to wait 5 years, but that wasn't enough because since I came here by myself, I had to be of some age of majority or something like that to file my citizenship papers. There's actually a bit of a story that I actually filed them right after my grandparents became citizens, claiming that I'm now the son of American citizens. And we were able to convince a judge to not deny those papers immediately, but to allow me to state for a number of years that I had actually filed my papers for the court and was just waiting for the final court decision, which eventually happened, as I said, in 1959. Unfortunately, right thereafter, maybe a month or two, my grandfather died.
I really enjoyed you sharing with me how you basically gave the judge a way to ensure that your citizenship would be intact and be confirmed. We don't have time for it here, but I thought it was a wonderful story that you shared with me and showed a great deal of initiative of yours as an 18-year-old. Robert, much of what you know about your parents, as you've said several times today, and your early life before coming to the U.S., you've learned fairly recently, and in fact, you continue to gain new information to this day. For example, who this other witness was to your parents' marriage. Tell us, if you can, about how you've been able to learn as much as you have.
I knew really very little about my family. My grandparents, as I understand, is fairly typical of survivors and children, in this case, grandparents and grandchild, didn't talk much about my family. In fact, they talked virtually nothing about my family. The little that I do know, I got from my aunt, my father's older sister. And the few things are basically family lore, and they came from my aunt. Starting about 25 years ago, my daughter Miriam decided that she wanted to know about my family, that is her father's family. So she started doing serious research about my family. Since then, we've collected hundreds of historical documents, newspaper articles, letters, pictures, and similar material, and have had and are continuing extensive communications with individuals, email communications with individuals who have some knowledge about the circumstances of my family, although, of course, they didn't know my family as such. We have assembled some of that material into a visual slide presentation, and your audience is seeing some of the slides now.
Mm-hmm. And Robert, as part of that journey, learning everything that you are learning and continue to learn, you're also learning about, from time to time, about what happened to other family members. Will you tell us about your paternal uncle, Joseph Teitel, and what happened to him?
Yeah, as I mentioned right at the beginning, my grandparents had 3 children. Daughter, my father's sister, I've talked about a couple of times, and my father, of course, about whom I've talked repeatedly. In between, there was a son named Joseph. And while his sister and his parents moved to Jerusalem, Joseph, like my parents, stayed in the Netherlands. He was unfortunately also killed in this case in Auschwitz.
Mhm.
So from my perspective, I've lost my parents and my uncle. From my grandmother's perspective, she has lost both her sons, her daughter-in-law, although we haven't mentioned at least one of her brothers. We have record of his being killed, and probably two other brothers.
Robert, you returned to Europe this past April and visited Amersfoort prison where your father was held. Can you tell us what that was like for you to take that trip and to actually see a place where something as terrible as the imprisonment of your father occurred?
Yeah. Miriam and I went first to Wuppertal, the town in Germany where my father first came to the attention of the Gestapo. I was invited to come and give a talk about my father as part of their 80th liberation ceremony. After that, Miriam and I were escorted for 4 days in the Netherlands to visit family places and family addresses. We didn't do any tourist stuff, except perhaps the Netherlands Holocaust Museum. The two most emotional visits on that trip were the visit to Amersfoort. This is one of the original watchtowers of the prison, which has been turned into a museum in the Netherlands, and the visit to the cemetery where my mother is buried. We were also able to visit the Koster family home where I lived as a foster child after the war. That house is still standing. It was in a very rural area. It's now in a rather built up area. It's the only of the original houses still in the neighborhood. And we were able to visit the family who is living there now, who had lived there a very long time. In fact, they lived there since the Kosters moved out in the 50s. Mm. And we spent a delightful hour or so with them in that house. And one of their sons, coincidentally also having gone to TU Delft, was with them. And we shared memories as kids growing up in that house. And he also skated on the same canal.
That had to be just for you very very poignant in every way to share that with their child. Robert, now you and Miriam and other family members have a very important trip coming up where you will have a memorial place for your relatives who were murdered during the Holocaust. Tell us about these memorial plaques and their significance.
Yes, in November of 2025, we are going to Muiderberg for the location of the safe house where we lived for a Stolperstein ceremony. A Stolperstein, or stumbling stone, is really a metal plaque being placed in front of houses where Jews lived before they were killed by the Nazis. Such a plaque is being placed in front of the house we lived in Muiderberg in 1941 and 42. And afterward, I'm again going to Wuppertal for another remembrance ceremony.
And on this trip, you're going to also do other research. And if we were to have this conversation in December, my guess is you would have more to tell us than you're able to do even today.
Right. We haven't plotted out our exact itinerary, but Miriam and I are hoping to go to a couple of archives which have not been digitized and not available via the internet.
Robert, your grandfather seems to have had a lot of chutzpah or boldness, like bringing his family from Poland to the Netherlands during the First World War, the kidnapping attempt to take you to Jerusalem, and getting Representative Roosevelt Jr. to introduce a bill in Congress to allow you to come to the United States. Do you have other examples of that level of initiative of your grandfather, who sounds like he was a pretty remarkable fellow?
Yeah, he certainly was a remarkable fellow. As you mentioned, the movement across Europe in the middle of World War I and the attempted kidnapping of me, and then being able to access Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. There are at least two other examples, and they're slightly related. I mentioned that he came to the United States a couple of years after his daughter had come. In fact, he had come on a visitor's visa and had pasted a bond that he would leave the country. Well, he overstayed the visitor's visa, but did then leave the country in order to be able to come back with a visa for permanent residence and eventual citizenship. And the country he found, and he had to find one without a quota against immigrants to the United States, he found a country that relatively unknown in 1948 or so, and that was Cuba. Family lore has it that he bought Cuban citizenship. We have no record of it. But then he immigrated to the United States officially via Miami, Florida. So he was here. He managed to get me over here about 5 years after he got here the second time. He became a citizen. And then, given the way he normally does things, he went back to Congress and had a bill introduced to get his visa bond back. And he made apparently a pretty good case, saying that he's become a really good citizen, and that he had these wanderings around the world, in part because of persecution in various places. And this has become his homeland where he's safe, and that kind of thing. And they added that, by added, I mean the report substantiating this request for his bond return, that they went as far as adopting their previously orphaned grandchild. And that turns out the visa bond was successful.
Robert, not only did he have a lot of chutzpah, but he was also a really smart guy, and he figured out very quickly how American government really works, something I think a lot of us could learn some more lessons in. So thanks for sharing that, Robert. Robert, I do have one more question for you today, and that is, as we face a dangerous surge in anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, please tell us why you feel it is important to share your firsthand account of the Holocaust and what we all can learn from it.
Yeah. With so much anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial today, I think it's important to tell my story, and of course other Holocaust survivors telling their stories, to let people know that the Holocaust really happened, that it was real, that it killed people, such as my parents and my uncle, and that it had an effect on many people's lives, including clearly my own as an orphan right after the war. Anti-Semitism is one of those forms of ideology that thinks in terms of we or us versus them or others. Other forms of this ideology clearly include racism, homophobia, xenophobia, sexism, etc. When I speak to young people, which I do as part of my Holocaust volunteer activity, I speak mostly to junior high and high school students, sometimes live here at the Holocaust Museum, sometimes via, most of the time via Zoom, because it's such a wonderful technology to be able to talk to kids all over the country. I tell them an analogy that they understand that may not appeal as much to adults, but it seems to work with kids. And that is, I tell them that the we or us versus them or the other attitude really starts in school. It starts with bullying, where the bullies believe that they are the we and their victims are the them. Not a perfect analogy, but one that junior high and high school kids understand, because they've been probably through it from one end or the other. If they were on the bully end, maybe they've learned something. All forms of derogatory comments or derogatory action against persons of different religion, race, nationality, gender, etc., needs to be confronted and needs to be not let get out of touch. It needs to be stopped. Such hatred should never be allowed to become so extreme as to create another Holocaust.
Robert, thank you very much for everything you've said today, and including your closing remarks that you just made. They're profound. I think your analogy of bullying works very well, and it should work for adults, at least those who have kids that have experienced bullying. So thank you for speaking out. Thank you for doing what you're doing as a volunteer, speaking about your experience in the Holocaust. We are all greatly enriched in every way by your willingness to do this, and is helping to contribute to combating the very things you've just described: hatred, anti-Semitism, all the forms of isms. So thank you deeply, Robert.
Well, thank you very much for conducting this interview.
Thank you, Robert. Look forward to talking with you again, I hope soon. I'd like to take a moment to thank our donor. First Person is made possible through the generous support of the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation. And I'd also like to invite you all to join us again in October for another First Person program. Thanks for being with us today. Thanks for spending this time with Robert Teitel.